India is a hot destination for investment, and corporate governance definitely is the key to attract higher investments. The world of corporate governance is dynamic and ever-changing, but transparency in the board is definitely the key. NSE has organized a seminar, Board Evaluation, an Imperative for Corporate Governance. We spoke to Nirmal Mohanty of NSE for further details.
Today's seminar is about board evaluation. Board evaluation, first of all, has to be seen as a governance initiative. The board is the linchpin of good corporate governance in any company. NSE's interest in corporate governance stems from the fact that as a stock exchange, it's mandated to monitor the compliance of its listed companies with the listing agreement and other disclosure norms. But NSE goes beyond this mandate. This is certainly not the first instance that NSE has gotten into this, that we have constituted an NSE Center for Excellence in Corporate Governance, which is an independent expert advisory body. In addition, of course, we host a number of seminars to further the cause of corporate governance, such as this one.
Good evening. Let me extend a very warm welcome on my personal behalf and on behalf of NSE once again to all of you. As an exchange, over the last few years, we have tried to be a catalyst and create forums for discussion and for helping listed companies move up the compliance chain from a tick box exercise to what we would all say is a desirable level of compliance and spirit. This is an ongoing effort. So whenever there are topics of which are breaking new ground or new territory, which requires a significant amount of dialogue, engagement between market participants, exchanges, regulators, we facilitate a lot of that to see that we can come out with a more crystallized and a more concrete action plan, if I may put it that way. It's in that same tone and tenor that we have brought board evaluation discussion today for the benefit of our listed companies. We certainly see this exercise as a very key milestone, not just from the fact that it is important to comply with in the year that we are in, but also from the perspective of how can we help our leading board members and leading companies to use this tool and to use this form much more effectively. As part of the corporate governance research work over the last couple of years, we have also put in place an annual conference on corporate governance. And we also have an interesting newsletter which goes out on topics of great interest, like the CSR, like the RPT, and so on. I must say that the time at which we have started this exercise and the time at which the amendments in the acts have happened has been a very fortuitous coincidence. So there is definitely no dearth for the areas in which we can engage, and hopefully we can jointly provide value as well. I wish the seminar all the very best, and thank you once again for coming here and making this so special to us.
Our keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Chris Pierce, is the CEO of Global Governance Services Limited, based in London. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to share my experiences in terms of board evaluation. So, why are we introducing board evaluation? Well, firstly, it's a legal requirement, but in general terms, it can improve the performance of the board. It allows the chairman to provide more effective leadership. It allows personal development of board members, and it can improve accountability. The challenges associated with board evaluation, and I know a number of your organisations have already gone through evaluation, some for the first time. The first and the most important thing is to do it right. So you've got to get it absolutely right in terms of the design of the process. There is an issue over ownership of Indian companies. Many of the companies that I look at in India have a highly concentrated as opposed to a highly dispersed share ownership. This creates problems. There are issues here in India associated with cultural issues. Southern Asia has a particular issue associated with commenting both favourably and more particularly unfavourably on colleagues, on friends, and particularly on superiors. The next challenge is associated with cost, not just financial cost, but time. And in general, there can be a director resistance to the unknown. They haven't been evaluated before, and they think that it's going to be quite critical. So my experience in terms of board evaluations is if you have got a board that is focused upon governance, there will probably be a greater emphasis upon strategy, and there will certainly be better relationships between the board, the CEO, and the shareholders in general. So, ladies, gentlemen, I commend board evaluation to you. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mr. Cyril Schroff. He's a managing partner with Amarchand Mangaldas. So Mr. Schroff, please.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Now, I've been given the slightly boring job of going through some of the regulations and in terms of particularly pointing you to the what are the legal underpinnings of board evaluation. I think the big place where the underpinnings which one finds in relation to evaluation of boards and roles and codes of behavior is Schedule 4 of the Companies Act, and it lays down a number of things including the guidelines for professional conduct, role and functions of boards and independent directors, particularly two subsections of it, separate, which relate to how independent directors should behave. That independent directors must at least meet once a year without the attendance of the non-independent directors. Again, a question which I know we're going to discuss in the panel is, are you going to use Schedule 4 of the Companies Act as the Bible for really evaluating board performance, or are we going to do something which is more broader? What tools will we use? Will there be questionnaires, interviews, or just really a board conversation? Finally, a little bit on consequences. So could be that the NRC may recommend removal of a director from the board. Unlikely that there will be somebody so bad, but theoretically possible. In terms of the code for independent directors and listing agreement, I think one of the consequences which is prescribed is whether to extend for a second term or not. Composition and recomposition of board committees, compensation could be tied to performance. And last but not least, particularly if you've taken people of integrity and reputation, is the reputational impact on them. Market valuations could be affected, could have an implication on fundraising, and lastly a regulatory interface, because if one can imagine annual reports coming with a lot of negative comments and they land up before SEBI or they land up before the stock exchange, I'm sure you'll do something about it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Ryan Lowe. He's a partner with People and Organization Advisory Practice, Ernst & Young India.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Given the fact that, the experience in India is very, very limited, what I intend to cover really is some international experiences on how these things are done, what the experience has been. The first one that we'll talk about is the impact on remuneration. Globally, there is no linkage between board evaluation and directors' remuneration. It's interesting to hear that the UK Corporate Governance Code states that a significant proportion of executive director remuneration should be linked to performance. Performance, yes, but no specific linkage to board evaluation outcomes. What is the focus of shareholder activism in the UK? There is a large amount of focus on very detailed disclosures and higher shareholder say on pay. Shareholders now are expecting to see a very, very high level of detailed disclosures on director remuneration. Interestingly, some recent guidelines also put a binding vote on directors' remuneration policy to the shareholder. The other aspect is that a higher quantum of bonus is now being deferred. So these are all initiatives aimed at bringing a better alignment between performance metrics and director remuneration. However, there is no linkage to specifically board evaluation results. But what does that mean for us in India? We've been told that we do need to link board evaluation with director remuneration. These are the critical prerequisites for ensuring that this can be done in a transparent manner. First and foremost, a chairman who is committed to the process of board evaluation. Second, a clearly stated board agenda for the year. And there are roles and responsibilities articulated for each director. And again, the linkages of the outcome which are to be stated up front to the remuneration and the continuation of the process. So the continuation part, in my view, is a long way off here in India. But we can certainly start on the evaluation, link it with improvements, and link it with remuneration over a period of time. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Good evening, friends. Let's get on to our panel discussion. There's been a great deal of confusion on this topic. I'm looking forward to my colleagues taking us through the provisions. And the first is the philosophical underpinning. The second portion is the legal issues. And the final is all the other stuff. And while some of what we are going to be saying may sound negative, I think the consistent message so far has been, and I would like to contribute to that same message, that it's a thing I think we need to embrace. And if all of us want to be on boards that we are proud to belong to, then indeed board evaluation is an important part of achieving those wishes that each of us has. So with that brief introduction, can I start by first asking Bala, what are the advantages you see that would flow to Indian companies out of doing evaluations of the board, committees and individual directors in particular?
The fact that the boards have survived for all these almost 200 years now, so there must be some purpose behind, and if that is, we are reconciled to that principle that we ought to have a board of people who will oversee, who will counsel, who will control, who will contribute to the functioning of an operation, then it seems fair that if they are not accountable to anybody else, at least they should be accountable to themselves once in a way. I think that itself is a good enough reason, I think, for having an evaluation of performance of board. We do that all the time for everybody other than the board members. They also have a job to do. Whether the job has been well done or not well done is something worth looking at. I think it makes sense to see at the end of the year how other people see us in terms of performance. A board is such a secretive institution. Everything is confidential. So who can evaluate the board? I think it's only they themselves who can evaluate the board. So I think that is the philosophy. Can I learn something from others in my group and therefore be a better member of that group rather than be a free rider?
Deepak, would you like to add to that?
I'm a strong believer that the board should be evaluated. Is the evaluation in the first year in India going to give you the desired results? I don't think so. I think it's going to be a work in progress for a few years. I think if it's done the right way, and I think evaluation in that sense is, I think, a wrong term. I think if we were to use this as a developmental tool, where we're saying that this whole thing is being done really to improve the effectiveness of boards and the efficiency with which we conduct board meetings, then I think there is a strong possibility that there will be a buy-in. The other way you can get the buy-in is really discussing it with the whole board over a longer period of time. And I think if the net result of that is going to be an improvement in the way we perform as a board, it's a huge positive.
Chris, in your experience, where have things gone wrong and what are our learnings and what should we do to avoid this whole evaluation process running into the sand?
I think the very fact that time is being made available to the board to think about their processes, about their tasks, about how to improve things is a step in the right direction. I think one of the questions that you can legitimately ask, particularly to the independent directors, ask them, if you had another hour's worth of board meeting, what would you want to discuss in that additional hour? And what are the things that are worrying you that perhaps the board hasn't looked at? And I'll give an example here. It's associated with BP. 2010, there was a board evaluation. Tracy Long did the questioning, and she asked that question to many of the directors, and they said, we've got two real concerns. The first one was there was a focus upon production and operational targets, and at times they felt that safety wasn't being looked at substantially. And the second thing that they said that they had concern with was the overload of the chairman. The chairman was on too many other boards as chairman, and the chief executive currently was under a lot of stress in terms of all the subsidiaries that were being managed. Now, the interesting thing about the BP board evaluation was this was not a very intelligent evaluator making an assessment of the board processes. This is what the directors were saying and thinking. They put it into their board evaluation report. The board evaluation report was agreed and ratified by the board, and then they interestingly put it in their annual report. And 2010 was an interesting date for BP, because that was the year of the Gulf of Mexico Deep Horizon oil spill. And this was a board evaluation that happened before the oil spill happened. Now, what I am saying is that that had probably got squeezed off of agenda after agenda of the board meeting. The evaluation can pick those sort of things up, and then legitimately you can ask of the board, well, what did you do about things? And the question I would ask when I'm doing evaluations of individual directors, one of the hardest questions that non-executive directors have to answer from me, I think, is if you had not been at the board, any of the board meetings for the last year, what would have been the difference? And if you as an individual director can't identify where you've made a difference, then there is something wrong with the board process that is taking place, and this is what board evaluation is all about.
I think that's an excellent single self-evaluation question. If we can move on to the legal aspects, Cyril, you know, there was a fair amount of discussion on compensation. Now we have, as required by the law, the independent directors have to go off and sit together and assess the performance of the executive director. The NRC is also to evaluate the same lot and to determine what their compensation should be. Now, a thorough NRC spends a fair amount of time at the beginning of the year determining what are the KRAs, the targets, the balanced scorecard, whatever way you are going to assess your MD and your finance director and so on. The independent directors meeting meets once a year. It isn't involved in setting the goals. It perhaps doesn't even have the depth to which it needs to go to make the kind of assessment the NRC does. So is it necessary that while the independent directors do an assessment and the NRC uses that feedback, that alone shouldn't determine then what bonus is paid to the executive management?
I think there's a flaw in the process, because ultimately where is the data coming from? And the data is coming from the depths of the company.
Yes.
And the independent directors really have no independent basis
Correct.
on which they can sort of verify this. It does provide probably a mechanism where some amount of bias is removed, and there is perhaps an overview of comparing performance with reference to some general goals that might have been fixed in the beginning. So it's an approximate process. I don't think it's a foolproof process which will always deliver the sort of right outcome, but it has a sort of a self-correcting mechanism which will ensure that there is no abuse of the compensation system in the company. So to that extent, I think it's a good blunt instrument to use, but it's not nuanced enough to deliver specific outcomes.
So, well, I'll stop here before we move away from this topic. Or any questions, not comments?
Today, when we are talking about a mandated framework for board evaluation, I want to get a sense of how evolved a framework already exists or precedes the board evaluation in the form of setting the expectations and KRAs of, for example, the boards in companies in the Indian context.
The first thing I would say is that there has to be, for it to be an effective process, good buy-in from every individual concerned. So if you are going down an evaluation route, I would normally recommend that the chairman initiate that discussion in terms of how should we do it. Should we do it as a discussion in the board? Should we do it with questionnaires? Should we do it with interviews? How should we do it? And there be a general agreement from the board.
Sometimes we tend to spend more time on individual evaluation of individual directors.
Correct.
But we should also focus on the evaluation of the board as a whole.
Indeed.
Whether the board is effective or not. How do we allot our time?
Right.
How we are spending the time of the board, and are we giving adequate time on different areas, or are we ignoring some areas?
Quite right, Nipin. And the same on committees too. Now, I'm afraid we are running out of time, but I want to conclude. So I think there's enormous greater value in every board for how you can improve the board performance, what is not happening, which ought to be happening, which everyone agrees but has never been focused upon. And this indeed gives an action plan to the chairman and the management to improve how next year the board will perform or the committee will perform better. So may I thank all of you for being so patient and listening and participating in this session, and my colleagues who made fantastic contribution. Thank you all.
The objective of the seminar was to familiarize directors with board evaluation, its consequences, as well as the ongoing effort of NSE to enrich corporate governance. At last, we hope that this seminar genuinely helped people to learn about board evaluation, its importance, as well as how board works with the senior management as well as CEOs of the company.